At 05:17, the tarmac was still half-shadowed beneath the hangar's overhang. Captain Jordan Blake stepped out from the side service track, her boots striking the pavement with the kind of weight that only comes from repetition. Her flight suit was zipped to the collar. Creases pressed from memory, not for appearance. The line of aircraft reflected a soft gleam under the rising sun. A few ground crew shouted back and forth, trading instructions clipped short by engine whine and radio checks. Jordan walked past them without slowing. Her helmet was clipped to her left hip, gloves looped through the side strap, fingers curled like they still remembered the last sortie. Near the briefing tent, pilots in mixed gear gathered in loose clusters, NATO patches stitched to sleeves, bright call sign stickers pasted across helmet bags. A Royal Air Force lieutenant laughed at something a Canadian captain said. Jordan passed near, but no one turned to include her. Her name wasn't spoken. She stopped at her assigned aircraft, tail code already logged and systems half prepped. The F-15EX stood matte gray, heat-worn near the exhaust plates, with no nose art or personal mark, just a faint trace of weathered stencil under the canopy. She reached out with one hand, tapping the side access panel, then opened it without needing to look at the latch. Her fingers moved from habit, checking cabling, optical ports, sensor alignment. She didn't carry a clipboard. Her checklist was in her head. One of the crew walked over with a manifest sheet, already curled at the corners. He didn't say her name. He just handed the paper over and nodded once, like she was an expected delivery rather than a combat pilot. Inside the operations bay, names rotated through the central screen, green tags, call signs in bold, mission roles beside squad emblems. Her name was at the bottom of the roster. No color, no remarks, just Blake. Jordan, F-15EX, Edge Escort. She wasn't the last one there, but she might as well have been. As the brief rolled on, filled with terrain overlays and mission zone diagrams, no one directed a single line toward her position. Her section of the table remained clean. She didn't fidget, didn't interrupt, just marked the altitude bands on her folded notepad and underlined one range curve with her pencil. She had cross-checked it with the night's data feed hours before sunrise. When the call signs were listed aloud, hers wasn't. Someone paused, scanning the manifest, then skipped ahead without comment. She wrote nothing in the margin, but the stillness in her posture told its own story. As the others filtered out, adjusting harness straps and pulling flight gloves tight, she walked back across the ramp. A junior lieutenant in a bright patch-covered vest asked who was taking last slot in the stack. No one answered, not out of disrespect, just out of assumption. Jordan passed behind them, silent. The radio chatter from the tower carried faint through her headset as she walked toward her aircraft. Her jet waited at the far end. No cameras, no crowd. Just one aircraft, one woman, and a morning sky that hadn't made room for her. Not yet. At 06:03, the hangar lights cast long shadows across the flight line. The ramp buzzed with pre-mission rhythm. Raptors stood closest to the main doors, pristine in their coating, shimmering in the half-light with sensor domes still covered. Further down, a pair of Eurofighter Typhoons gleamed under their twin tails, crews moving with familiar confidence as ground checks ticked off. Laughter carried across the concrete as pilots posed for a quick PR photo beside one of the newer F-35s. The Italian captain gestured toward the tail of Jordan's aircraft, head tilted. Who's flying the Antique? The question wasn't directed at anyone, but it drew a ripple of grins. A voice from the American crew replied between bites of protein bar. That's the spare. Insurance bird. Jordan heard it, but didn't respond. She stood near the forward fuselage of her F-15EX Eagle II, her hand resting on the refueling port cover, waiting for the digital lockout indicator to clear. The airframe was coated in a low-sheen tactical gray, weathered unevenly around the wing roots and under the flaps. There were no stencils beyond the basic unit codes. No nickname, no nose art. The only identifier was a thin, fading tag just below the canopy frame. Relay. She moved through the pre-flight steps with precision, not referring to a tablet or checklist board. Her hands knew the torque feel of each panel latch, the resistance of the port hinge on the avionics bay. She checked the auxiliary power unit line pressure, adjusted the flight control surface positions by 2 degrees to compensate for early crosswind bands, then ducked under the nose to inspect the front gear housing. A pair of Navy pilots walked past and glanced at her jet. One of them said low, "Is that the testbed variant?" The other laughed. "Nah, they just let her babysit it." Jordan remained crouched, pressing 2 fingers to the hydraulic pressure gauge. It read clean. She stood, dusted her knee lightly, and tapped the top of the gear strut twice. Habit. By 06:19, she had finished all external checks. No crew chief hovered nearby. She didn't need one. The internal systems calibration came next. She powered the cockpit to standby mode and watched as the HUD initialized. She adjusted the angle manually, aligning the projected center point with the edge of the canopy bow. Her left hand toggled through data link channels, confirming connectivity to the E3 Sentry, tanker relay, and AWACS support net. On the bench inside the hangar, a few pilots traded patches while joking about call signs. Jordan's helmet sat beside her pack, still clean, no stickers, no colors, just foam liners. She had cut herself for fit. She slid it on and clipped the chin strap down with one pull. Her gloves followed, palm first, knuckles stretching the leather evenly across. She passed one of the junior staffers by the fuel truck. He nodded quickly but said nothing. She returned the nod. No need for words. Her display was synced. Her fuel mix manually verified to account for vapor expansion in the high-altitude band. Most pilots let automation handle that. Jordan still ran it manually. A habit from test training days. She reached into her thigh pocket and pulled a folded printout, a weather-modified corridor overlay she had updated before dawn. Thin pencil marks traced possible refraction drifts along the eastern approach route. She didn't hand it in. It wasn't for the record. It was for her. The first aircraft rolled onto taxi at 06:33. The Typhoons moved in tandem, jet wash catching morning dust and tossing it in light clouds. Jordan waited at the edge of the ramp, visor down. When her name came up on the flight control register, it wasn't spoken. It blinked once on screen. F-15 EEX, right edge, call sign relay, confirm slot active. No voice followed. She clicked her mic once. Steady tone, slot confirmed, and then she climbed. One hand on the ladder, one on the canopy frame. Her boot met the same step it always had, the rubber worn smooth where her heel always landed. Inside the cockpit, everything responded with familiar delay. Not sluggish, just well used. The aircraft didn't shine, didn't turn heads. But when she powered up the radar suite, every system came online without a flicker. The Eagle was older than some of the crew outside, but it answered her touch like it had been waiting. That was enough. At 07:02, the first Raptor took the runway. It lifted smooth and fast, nose high, slipping into the gray-blue like it had never touched Earth. The second followed with a tighter angle, afterburners kicking just long enough to clear the zone and climb through the lower bands. Radio chatter stayed crisp, mostly altitude updates and package syncs, clipped by habit. The Typhoons rolled next. Their dual engines screamed, slightly louder, on takeoff, the signature pitch cutting through the idle hum below. Each pair climbed to assigned corridors at mid-range elevation, stabilizing in the northeast segment of the stack. They kept tight visuals, but no comms aside from formation calls. Flashier than necessary, but expected. At 0711, the E3 sentry began its taxi. Its radar dome caught the light in rotation, scanning even before reaching the active. Once airborne, it leveled slow, locking into its control orbit well west of center line. Behind it, the first KC-135 pushed forward, then the second, each heavy with fuel. Their wings flexed at full load, the climb deliberate like tinty. Freighters in formation. By 07:19, the C-17 rumbled into position. The Globemaster moved without elegance but with purpose. It lifted from the ground just behind the tankers, leveling early to stay within the logistics bracket. Its profile was bulk and drag, no threat posture, just cargo weight and steady engines. At 07:23, Jordan's F-15EX Eagle II took its place. She didn't announce the role. Control tagged her slot. Right edge escort. Active. Her HUD aligned to the escort overlay as she pushed throttle up to 94%. Takeoff was clean. No dip. No yaw. She rotated just past the tower's shadow and banked gently west to slide beneath the main altitude layer. She never asked for vectors. Her entry route had been plotted manually the night before. She flew it from memory. Offset 65 degrees right of the stack's central axis, 3,700 feet low. That kept her outside wake turbulence, but close enough for visual confirmation. It also gave her the best view of anything incoming from the Atlantic corridor. That wasn't part of the brief. It was her own logic. On the net, her call sign never came up, not unless someone confirmed spacing or asked for a tally. She replied when prompted. Voice level. Never filling the channel. Once she keyed in telemetry drift from the E3 and pinged back acknowledgement. No follow-up. The AWACS tag listed her simply as Escort Slot 5. The controller called her Relay only once. And even then, it sounded like a mistake. She kept hands light on the stick, making micro adjustments to maintain glide offset. Every 6 minutes. She toggled the altimeter correction manually, accounting for minor barometric deviation above sea layer. Her radar feed showed only clean air, green corridor bands, and the humming spread of IFF-confirmed units. At 0741, the full formation stabilized. From above, it looked like a stretched V, with the AWACS off-center and the tankers running parallel rails. Typhoons drifted wide. Raptors floated high and shallow. Jordan's Eagle rode the far right seam, nearly invisible if not for her heat signature. She monitored all of them, checked bearing angles against drift vectors, noted small shifts in altitude variance. Nothing out of tolerance, nothing to call in. Her job wasn't to engage, it was to exist in the gap. Stay quiet, stay sharp. Be the shape no one remembered until it was gone. Fuel sat steady at 87%. Systems read normal. She adjusted her trim by one click and tightened her glove once more. Then she looked out over the open water, where the line between sky and sea held still and blank. That was her view, the one no one else could see. At 0806, Jordan adjusted 2 degrees right and lowered altitude by 50 feet. It wasn't required, but the air felt wrong. Vapor bands off the sea shimmered more than expected. Her HUD showed green. No alerts. No deviation. Still, she watched the horizon. The typhoons had peeled north 20 minutes earlier. One by one, Raptors called bingo fuel and turned for base. Even the AWACS had shifted west into its next orbit. The corridor quieted fast. The only voice left was her own system's heartbeat. Low hum. No fluctuation. She toggled to the telemetry return screen. Nothing flagged, but a 2-cycle delay blinked on the upper band relay, just under the AWACS tag. No warning, no red, just a lag. She stared at it. 2 seconds shouldn't have mattered. Not on a quiet path, but it wasn't the delay that bothered her. It was the slope. She keyed the side display and brought up the waveform analysis panel. Most pilots never used it. It wasn't in the daily stack, but she had run it during that anomaly drill 6 months ago, the one simulating radar loss on stealth vector mapping. The drill had been flagged incomplete. AWACS deemed it low priority. She had kept the notes anyway. On her notepad, the math came back from memory. If the dip followed a movement curve, not noise, it meant object behavior, not ambient interference. She tapped the bearing manually. It aligned too closely with the corridor seam. No transponder, no shadow return, just an unexplained gap. At 0809, she adjusted heading by 1 degree, enough to get a cleaner angle on the southern quadrant. Her engines responded smooth, pressure stable, fuel just above 70%. She kept radio silence. There was nothing to say yet. Outside, the ocean stretched blank and even. No contrails ahead, no metal flash, just haze and depth. She narrowed her eyes behind the visor, looking for anything. The shimmer of heat, the ripple of wrong air. Another flicker rolled through the screen, not on radar, on vector density. A change too perfect to be static. Jordan leaned back in her seat, recentered the display, zoomed 1 level in. She marked it. 1 band, too narrow, too smooth. She drew a breath, shifted her right glove, thumb on the camera capture. Not to record, just to tag time. The radio stayed calm. AWACS cycling flight status. C-17 still moving clean ahead. Unaware. She opened the threat detection window. Nothing there. No spike. No silhouette. But the pattern held. The timing was too familiar. The dip fell, on the same interval as the felon simulation. Shadow pass. No beacon. Cold run. At 0812, Jordan switched to a secondary map layer and shaded the area by hand. Just pencil and finger pressure across the pad screen. Not for the mission file. For herself. Her HUD still read normal, but her gut did not. The silence didn't break. The airspace remained coded green. But the sky felt loaded now, like something unseen had weight. She didn't touch her weapon system. She didn't shift throttle, just watched, waited, calculated, and braced. At 0814, Jordan keyed her mic and kept her tone level. Visual anomaly south of corridor vector, no kingdom. Psnaparan. Negative ID. Possible stealth track. There was a pause on the channel. Then the AWACS controller replied, voice flat and unconcerned. Relay. No signature on scan. Fuel clocks up. Return to base. Confirm RTB. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed locked on the shimmer low in the sky, where the line between air and ocean bent wrong. She reached down and trimmed her pitch by 1/2 degree, not enough to shift bearing, just enough to slow the bleed on her fuel margin. Inside the cockpit, the low fuel indicator blinked yellow. She tapped the tank readout. It ticked down from 20.6%. Her breathing stayed even, hands steady. She flipped the auxiliary sensor display to waveform mode and kept watching the dip pattern build across the edge band. The comms line stayed quiet. No follow-up, no confirmation. She heard another crew check in from base, joking about landing rotation. Background chatter rolled on as if the sky was clean, as if nothing waited just beyond the visible layer. Jordan eased off throttle by 3%. Her RPM settled lower, still within margin. Every move she made was calculated, weight balanced, and clean. She toggled her data recorder but didn't send anything. The feed wouldn't show what she saw. Not yet. She drew a pencil line across her pad, one curve, matching the approach arc she remembered from the stealth drill. She knew that profile. The drop, the arc, the silence. It was behavior, not noise. She keyed her mic again. Negative RTB. Holding for visual confirm. Pattern irregular. No lights. No altitude deviation, no civilian traffic, no commercial tag. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't asking. She was stating. Another pause followed. AWACS replied without inflection. Relay. You are alone on that track. No data return. Confirm you're flying blind. She stared ahead and didn't blink. Copy. I know what I saw. Her fingers hovered over the waypoint selector. She didn't mark anything. Just kept the vector burned into her vision. The ocean ahead stayed still. The shimmer pulsed again, softer now, moving closer. She didn't look away. She wasn't going back. Not yet. At 0819 she saw it. Not radar, not return signal, just a ripple. A wrong shimmer near the edge of the corridor. The line between sky and ocean bent again. But this time, the curve held. It moved with too much control, too steady to be wind distortion, too clean to be cloud shadow. She adjusted heading by 12 degrees, just enough to shift her line of sight across the contact's likely arc. Her F-15EX responded without hesitation. Jordan didn't touch her radio. The AWACS had already dismissed her. There was no use repeating herself. The object reappeared, slightly clearer now. Angular nose, flat intake, and no wing lights. Su-57 Felon, running cold, vectoring slow. The aircraft floated along the glide band behind the C-17's bearing, silent, invisible, intentional. Her HUD was blank, no target data, no lock, no confirmation, but her eyes tracked it just fine. She pulled throttle back to 84%, easing into a climb. The F-15EX groaned slightly under the turn but held solid. She shifted altitude up to sit inside the solar arc. That would silhouette her. If they looked up, they'd see her. That was the plan. Fuel dropped to 10.2%. Her reserve buffer was shrinking. She toggled flare arm and left her thumb resting on the switch. The Felon hadn't deviated. Its vector aligned with the C-17's aft quadrant, just shy of weapon range. It wasn't watching her. It didn't think she mattered. At 0823, she pulled up 3 degrees and angled right. That would cross her intercept without provoking a response. Her jet eased through the bank with balance, nose still forward, posture calm. She wasn't coming in hot. She wasn't a threat, just visible, just undeniable. She whispered out loud without realizing it, "You're not alone up here." And then she fired the flares. Twin pops cracked behind her, magnesium bloom flaring white against the empty blue. They arced outward in clean symmetry, bursting wide enough to catch the attention of anyone glancing back. From the C-17, it would look like a signal, a declaration, a marker in space that didn't belong there. The Felon hesitated. Not much. Just a twitch, a minor shift in tail position. But it was enough. Enough to show it had seen her. Enough to break its silence. She didn't move. Didn't pursue. Just held position, drifting in clear daylight. The flare trails hung like chalk lines in the sky. She leveled wings. Her HUD remained empty, but behind her visor, her eyes stayed locked on the threat. Calm, focused, ready. At 0825, Jordan held her altitude just above the sun line. The flare smoke still drifted behind her in thin curls, fading into the atmosphere. The Su-57 hadn't turned sharply. It didn't need to. Its shift was slow, measured, like a door closing quietly. She watched the tail vector slide left, banking low toward open ocean. No defensive turn, no offensive posturing, just withdrawal. Her HUD stayed empty, as if nothing had ever been there. But her eyes stayed fixed on that diminishing outline until it vanished into the haze. Fuel dropped to 2.4%. The low-flow alert blinked steady on her console. Her hands didn't move. She stayed in position for 20 seconds more. confirming separation. Her eagle held the space between the C-17 and the retreat path like a shield. No one had requested. At Aero 827, she toggled her radio. Her voice came clear, flat. Exiting combat window. RTB. Copy. No one answered right away. Just background static and the faint hum of system. Tones. She didn't wait. She banked gently left, pulling away from the formation at a glide angle designed to save every drop remaining. At 2.0% fuel, her flight was still stable. She trimmed the pitch manually and dialed back throttle again. The aircraft felt lighter now, quieter, not weak, just resolved. She didn't look back at the corridor. She didn't need to. She had stayed in the blind spot long enough for someone else to see. That was the point. Not the flare, not the vector, the presence. She had shown it, and now it was gone. No missile, no lock, no chase, just a shadow that blinked and backed away, because she was there. At 0830, her beacon pinged return status. The system logged it. Fuel, critical, aircraft, outbound, no follow-up, no chatter, just one flight, one pilot, and the slow hum of a jet easing home through thin air. Her job was done, and no one could unsee it now. At 0911, the tent was still. Only the low hum of the playback console filled the room, matched by the soft tick of coffee cooling in half-drunk cups. A junior analyst paused the screen, rolled it back 10 seconds, then tapped the key again. The AWACS thermal feed flickered forward in shades of green and black. Nothing showed at first. Just standard data streams, altitude overlays, altitude drops, and then, faintly, a bloom in quadrant 6, a small pulse, white-hot, circular, flare. Someone leaned in. There was no sound, just the sudden white flash in a corner of the monitor and a silhouette slicing behind it. One frame, maybe two, an eagle banking into the sun, no IFF tag in view, but the angle was unmistakable. Someone in the back said, "That's her." No one replied. They just watched. The feed rolled forward again. A faint trail of heat distortion hovered behind the flare path. Not enough for full confirmation, but enough to know something had moved. Something real. Someone whispered, "Check it against the C-17 nose cam." At 0913, the second feed loaded. The internal playback clicked on, viewed from inside the transport cockpit. The pilot's voice was calm, logged from earlier. He had reported nothing unusual, but the camera didn't lie. At the edge of the feed, right above the cargo ramp line, the same flare burst came into view, and just behind it, clear and centered for 2 seconds, the shape of a jet floating silent in open sky, tail angled, wings level, no weapon raised, no word spoken, just one aircraft, alone, holding position. A few more pilots had filtered into the tent by then. No one called them. They just came, drawn in by the shift in tone, the quiet everyone felt, but didn't name. The feed looped again. Slower this time. One of the senior flight leads crossed his arms, staring at the screen. He didn't say anything at first. Then, without turning, he spoke to no one in particular. Put her name on the damn jet. That was all. No applause, no handshakes, no debrief commentary, just the weight of what they had seen. By 10:02, someone rolled open the hangar door. The F-15EX sat at the far end of the line. Quiet. Engines still cooling. The sun hit the fuselage low. The stencils had already been pulled from the locker. A single airman stood with a brush and black paint, tracing out the letters beneath the canopy. RELAY. Jordan wasn't there to see it. She had walked off flight line alone, same as always. No speech, no nod, no recognition needed, but now the name stayed. The crew didn't speak. They didn't need to. The sky had spoken for her. At 10:14, the sun was sharp and direct, washing the tarmac in glare. The engines behind her were silent now, cooling metal ticking softly beneath the skin of the jet. Jordan stepped down the ladder slowly, boots finding familiar footholds, one at a time. Her gloves were tucked into her waistband. Her helmet hung loose at her side, visor half smeared with sweat and sun. The flight suit clung at the collar, darkened under the arms, knees creased with wear. No one met her at the aircraft. No crew chief. No salute. Just distance. She walked the same path she had taken that morning. Past the fuel rigs. Past the row of fighters lined for post-mission checks. A few techs looked up as she passed. None smiled. None spoke. But they stepped aside. The chatter near the open hangar had softened. Pilots leaned against crates, reviewing flight logs or staring at the floor. Someone paused mid-sentence when she came into view. They shifted just enough to give her space. That was new. Jordan kept her eyes forward. Her steps were even, measured, not slow, not hurried. Just sure. Her helmet swung low with each stride, the strap brushing her leg like a ticking clock. At the edge of the tent, the Royal Air Force lieutenant from earlier leaned against the intake vent. His flight suit was still half unzipped. He straightened slightly as she neared, hands resting on his hips, mouth parting like he might say something. He didn't. She passed by, and he watched her go. She reached the side door to the briefing tent and paused. Her reflection barely showed in the narrow glass, just enough to see the sweat on her brow, the dust on her boots, the steadiness in her stance. She didn't linger. She opened the door and walked through. Inside. The cooler air settled over her skin like a second shift. No one looked up from the playback table, still frozen on the frame where the flare lit the sky. She didn't stop there. She moved past them, down the hallway toward her locker. At 10:20, the younger pilot who had joked that morning stood just outside the supply cage, helmet still clipped at his chest. He didn't speak. He didn't avert his eyes either. He just watched as she passed. Jordan gave no nod, no glance, no acknowledgement, not because she meant to ignore him, but because there was nothing left to say. The path back had not changed. The steps were the same. But now, it belonged to her. Every inch, every silence, every breath between footsteps. She disappeared into the hallway without turning once. Behind her, the noise resumed, but it was different now. Softer, slower, like even the ground remembered. At 11:03, Jordan sat alone at the metal desk inside the admin trailer. Her gloves lay folded on the table, next to her helmet, visor down. The hum of the air unit buzzed overhead, loud in the silence that came after everything else. The room was empty. No flight lead, no debrief officer, no waiting crowd. Just her and the screen. She typed slowly, carefully. The cursor blinked between sentences like a breath held. Then, one line at the top of the report. Visual contact with non-declared airframe. Intercept maneuver initiated. Flares deployed. Adversary diverted. RTB confirmed. No munitions released. 19 words. No mention of the flare's arc or how she aimed it to catch the sun. No record of the telemetry lag she tracked by hand. No line describing the silence on the net when she made the call, or how the aircraft backed away without a fight because she never gave it the opening. Her hands stayed still on the table, not clenched, not tense, just there, palms open, resting on the steel. Her breath moved slowly, chest rising against the front of her flight suit. She closed her eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, from clarity. She didn't need to replay it. She had lived it once, fully. That was enough. Outside, Someone wheeled a toolbox across the hangar bay. A light flickered, then steadied. Her jet sat quiet at the far edge. Stenciled name, still drying under the sun. No ceremony, no orders, just truth in black paint. Jordan leaned back in the chair and looked out the small window. The flight line shimmered with heat. Crews moved in and out of shadow. No one was looking at her. And that felt right. She had flown her mission in silence, held the line without being told. She had chosen to act when no one would have blamed her for pulling back. And she never asked anyone to notice. The screen dimmed slightly in front of her. She reached forward and tapped it once, then stood. Integrity is a quiet thing. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't wait for permission. It moves when no one's watching and holds fast when nothing else will. The soft voice came not from the room, but from somewhere deeper. A question that didn't need volume to carry weight. What would you do when no one sees you?